Hello and welcome. My name is Beth Powell and you're probably here because you're one of my students who needs to make up this class. So this video series is going to follow the history of Oklahoma as outlined by the Oklahoma academic standards currently in place, and we're relying heavily on David Baird and Danny Gobel's book Oklahoma: A History, which you should be reading if you're one of my students. Our story begins before history begins, which is to say during a period we call prehistory. Prehistory is the name given to the time that occurred before writing was invented to record events. We learn about prehistoric events through archaeological finds. But first, let's talk about the land itself. Okay, prehistoric Oklahoma. And for this part of our class, we're borrowing a public Prezi file from some creator named Jake Stats, which is really well done, and I did not feel the need to reinvent the wheel. So let's look at what Oklahoma really used to be like. We didn't always have mountains. We had swamps. Ooh, dinosaurs. We're going to start this story 400 million years ago. The surface of Oklahoma was flat and almost completely covered by a shallow inland sea. So your living room was underwater. The predominant form of marine life at this time was the trilobite, which is a creepy looking dude. And then some tectonic activity happened and our mountains formed. About 300 million years ago. So these great mountain chains were as tall as the Himalayas, but now there's only fragments of them left. The Wichitas, the Owichitas, the Arbuckles, which you see on your way down to Dallas. You drive right through the Arbuckle Mountains on the way to Dallas on I-35. So here, let's ask this question. What did Oklahomans find in their mountains in the early 1900s? Was it diamonds, gold, or silver? Yep, it was gold. A little mini gold rush. In the Lost Gold Mines of Oklahoma, there's a really interesting video about that out on YouTube, which is one of your assignment choices for the week. So extreme heat and pressure not only created gold, but it also created something else. And there's a city in Oklahoma named after this particular stone. You might have countertops in your house made of this stone. Someone even say it was grand. Yep, it's granite. Oklahoma's got granite, which is in 3 major counties we find granite: Johnston, Jackson, and Greer. So when the mountains jetted up, adjacent areas, and adjacent means next to or possibly joined, adjacent areas of land dropped down, which created basins. You can see here in this picture, the mountains are up and then there's basins kind of in between them. So these natural depressions of the Earth's surface usually contain water, became swamps. And they had huge plants and flowers and reptiles and insects. And then these things, these plants and flowers and reptiles and insects, they die. They're still connected, and I'm going to skip this video, which is a really cool video from The Lion King, but you guys are in a makeup class, so we've got a lot to get through. So when these plants and creatures died, their remains were collected beneath the swamp waters. I don't know why I just did that. Okay, and this act helped produce Oklahoma's treasures, which are fossil fuels: coal, petroleum, and natural gas. You're all aware of petroleum. Oklahoma produces 5% of the national total, and oil has been found in 66 of our 77 counties. 66. That's basically most of them. Natural gas is another one of our little treasures. We produce 10% of the national total. And coal. Most people don't realize that we are a coal-producing state. They think of the Appalachian Mountains as coal-producing, but Oklahoma also produced coal. Okay, so that is it on prehistoric Oklahoma for the moment. Let's move on to our next subtopic. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Oklahoma's geography. Today we find Oklahoma in the south-central region of the U.S., and I would argue that as a state we have a cultural identity problem. Are we Southern? Are we Midwestern? Are we Southwestern? You ask 3 different Oklahomans and you're likely to receive 3 different answers. We just don't know. But what we do know is that Oklahoma is the 28th most populous of the 50 states, and the name Oklahoma is derived from 2 Choctaw words, Okla and Huma, which mean red people. Oklahoma is the 20th largest land state when we're talking about area in the U.S., and it has almost 70,000 square miles, which are organized into 77 counties. These counties are broken down to 6 different regions or countries. The countries colored red, the counties, colored red in this map make up a region called Red Carpet Country. That includes the Great Salt Plains, Alabaster Caverns, and Little Sahara State Park. The green-colored counties make up the Green Country region. That includes a section of Route 66, the city of Tulsa, Carrie Underwood's hometown of Chakotah, and the only skyscraper designed by famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright. The purple counties make up Frontier Country, which boasts the present and the original state capitals located in Oklahoma City and Guthrie, respectively. It's also home to the University of Oklahoma and us, those of you who are in the Grady-McLean County area with me. The blue-colored counties make up Chickasaw Country because it's home to the Chickasaw tribe. The Arbuckle Mountains are a major feature, along with several recreation areas such as Turner Falls, Lake Murray, Lake of the Arbuckles, the Chickasaw National Recreation Area, and Lake Texoma, which is shared with the counties in orange. Lake Texoma actually covers the blue, a little bit of the blue and a little bit of the orange areas. And the orange counties are Choctaw Country. The Choctaw tribe makes its home in southeastern Oklahoma, and those counties include beautiful Broken Bow area. Visitors to Choctaw Country can visit Blake Shelton's hometown of Ada, and then go kayaking at Clayton Lake in the Kiamichi Mountains, or you can search for Bigfoot in the Ouachita Forest. You could also visit the 2nd largest Asian elephant herd in the U.S. at the Endangered Art Foundation, Hugo. And the yellow counties round out the countries, and they're collectively referred to as Great Plains County. It's home to Anadarko, the self-proclaimed Indian capital of the nation, the Ouachita Battlefield National Historical Site, and the cobblestone community of Medicine Park, as well as the Red Rock Canyon State Park in Hinton. The state is crossed by 3 major interstates. I-35, which runs north and south, I-40, which runs east and west through the middle of the state, and I-44, which runs diagonally from Lake Wichita Falls up to Joplin, Missouri, and through Tulsa. There are also well over 100 state highways and even more gravel roads still crossing the state's rural areas. Some major cities in the U.S., in Oklahoma, are Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Muskogee, Norman, Lawton, Ardmore, a lot of the major cities. There's some trails. Oklahoma's geography, you know about the trails, and probably the most significant one that we could talk about, it runs right through our geographical area is located along what is now US 81, Highway 81. The Chisholm Trail has a lot of beautiful landscape and some wildly exciting history. It's an iconic cattle trail, and it once provided a pass for South Texas ranchers to distribute beef to the northern states. They wanted to get their cattle up to Kansas. Today the route winds through a bunch of charming small towns, and this year, 2017, marks its 150th anniversary. There's going to be tons of special events that you could check out this year. If you go to travelok.org, they've got them listed. Now, we mostly travel by car in Oklahoma. We're kind of a destination-driven state, but there are a lot of railroads. This is a railways map of Oklahoma. If you haven't taken a passenger train, you should. It's really cool. There's a really neat route from like Norman down to Fort Worth that makes for a nice weekend getaway or what have you. You can also pick it up in Pauls Valley, or you can pick it up in Ardmore. It's called the Heartland Flyer. So next we're going to talk about ecological regions and natural resources. We're going to borrow another public Prezi from Mr. Stats to go over the ecoregions in Oklahoma. So how many land regions or ecoregions does Oklahoma have? 1, 2, 5, 8? Maybe there's 12. How many are there? There are 10. Let's talk about what these guys are. First, let's define some things. A plateau is an area of highland usually consisting of relatively flat terrain. Plains are a large area of flat land with few trees. So these are our 10 ecoregions in Oklahoma. The Ozark Plateau is located in the northeast part of the state. It's an extension of the Missouri-Arkansas landscape. It's got rivers, steep valley walls, separated by broad, grassy areas. The streams have been dammed for hydropower. Then the prairie plains are in the south and west of the Ozark Plateau. A lot of vegetable farming and cattle grazing happens here, and some of the vegetables that are farmed are spinach and carrots. Most of the state's coal is found in this region. The Ouachita Mountains, southeastern Oklahoma, near the Oklahoma-Arkansas boundary. Sandstone ridges and a lot of forest, and the lumber industry is active down here. The sandstone region, oil was found here in first, and it made the region prominent. Sandstone hills. Let's talk about a few more definitions. A valley is a low area of land between hills or mountains. Generally, it has a stream flowing through it. Isn't that pretty? The Arbuckle Mountains are located in south central Oklahoma. We talked about those a little earlier. Millions of years ago, they were as high as the Himalayas, which are very high. But now they only stand 600 to 700 feet because of erosion. Erosion has uncovered many unusual rock formations. And the Wichita Mountains are in southwest Oklahoma down by Lawton. There are rough granite peaks and a lot of man-made lakes. But the lakes provide soil erosion protection. And then there's the Red River Valley region in southern Oklahoma along the Texas border. There's rolling prairies and forests, and the soil is very sandy. A lot of peanuts are grown there. The Red Bed Plains. This is the largest land region in Oklahoma. It stretches from Kansas to Texas. It's where we farm wheat, cotton, and oil. I guess we farm oil. There are two types of rocks in Oklahoma. There's shale, which is mud, and sandstone, which is sand. And then we have the gypsum hills, which are west of the Red Bed Plains. So the hills are covered in gypsum, which is a soft white yellow mineral that can form transparent crystals, and sheetrock is made of gypsum, as is wall plaster. It's kind of cool. The High Plains. This is in northwest Oklahoma and the Panhandle. They are part of the Great Plains, which extend further north, and they're mostly flat grasslands. They're called the High Plains because the land rises from 2,000 feet to nearly 5,000 feet in the western part of the state. And that is it for Oklahoma's ecological regions. Let's talk about the first people in Oklahoma, the Paleo Indians, the Wichitas. Okay, we are borrowing another one of Mr. Stat's prezzies to talk about Oklahoma's earliest inhabitants. We're going to talk about hunters, foragers, and early farmers. And here's our timeline. Let's talk about this documented evidence of big game hunters, but first let's run through some vocabulary words. A Clovis point is a heavy leaf-shaped spearhead used by the Clovis people about 11,000 years ago. It looks like this. A nomad is a person who moves from location to location, has no permanent home. And the hunters, the ones who were doing the hunting were usually men. Hunter groups were nomadic, and they followed herds of animals for food. Archaeologists are certain the big game hunters had reached Oklahoma by 11,000 years ago. How are they certain? Well, the evidence comes from southern Caddo County, where in a nearby canyon, archaeologists discovered ancient hunting grounds. But how do they know it was 11,000 years ago? Well, they found a mammoth, a woolly mammoth. Actually, the property owner found it and called it in to archaeologists, and they carbon dated the mammoth bones. Carbon dating is the determination of an age of an organic object using isotope carbon-14. Once in Oklahoma, the big game hunters stayed. They created a society more complex than big game hunting. The society was based on foraging. To forage means you're searching a wide area in order to obtain something, usually food. Did they still hunt? Of course they did. But it changed. So they were no longer hunting the woolly mammoths, probably because they'd been hunted to extinction, but they were now hunting bison. They were also more effective hunters. They improved weaponry. And I'm going to skip that. Were they still nomadic? Kind of. They were centrally based wanderers. Meat is no longer a majority of their diet. They supplemented meat with nuts, berries, sunflower seeds, and roots. So centrally based wanderers means that they still followed some of the herds and they kind of made it back to a central base location. They also began manufacturing baskets, nets, and string. Why is that important? Well, because they did fine arts, they decorated the stuff that they built, but baskets allowed for food storage. That's a rock carving. And there were early farmers. Farming was limited at first, but the three cistus were the main crops: beans, corn, and squash. They also farmed pumpkins. So that when they farmed, obviously you have to wait for the plants to grow, so you can't be really centrally based wanderers anymore. You need to stay where your crops are, and stay where your food is. And so this changed the way that they lived. They had to build some houses. Now, pottery is important as well. It was most likely made by women, and it was distinctive because it was like coiled clay with an oval bottom. But it revolutionized our society because of food preparation and food storage advancements. Now it was easy to carry water. They also would decorate their pottery for artistic expression. So early farmers, however, didn't abandon their old ways of life. They still hunted and continued to gather. The Spiro Mounds in eastern Oklahoma are Oklahoma's most important archaeological site. It was a prehistoric Native American ceremonial and trade center with connections that extended from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes and from California to the East Coast. We're going to review this article by Cobblestone Magazine to learn about the Spiro Mounds. Spiro was established as a permanent settlement by AD 800, but people were living in the area beginning 8,000 years earlier. The mounds were built hundreds of years before mechanical vehicles without horses, mules, or oxen, which means that people were carrying the baskets full of earth to build the mounds. Some of the mounds appear to have been constructed to form a calendar, kind of maybe like Stonehenge-ish like, or observatory. At sunset during the seasonal solstices and equinoxes, the mounds line up. And archaeologists believe that the people of Spiro were from the Caddoan language group, which is similar to the one spoken by present-day Caddos and Wichitas and Pawnees. There are 12 mounds at Spiro, 9 house mounds, 2 temple mounds, and 1 burial mound. In 1969, these mounds were added to the National Register of Historic Places. The National Register of Historic Places protects national historic treasures, and preserves them. It is believed that Spiro is the most important prehistoric Native American cultural center east of the Rocky Mountains. Now we're going to talk about the next groups that visited Oklahoma, the explorers, both the European explorers and American expeditions. So we aren't borrowing Mr. Stat's Prezi this time. This is actually one that I created about European explorers in Oklahoma. The first ones we want to talk about are the Spanish explorers. The Spanish explorers were really searching for gold. There are 2 main purposes: the search for gold and then also because they wanted to do missionary work and convert Native Americans to Christianity. So we're going to talk about Francisco Vasquez de Coronado. Coronado was a Spanish explorer who was in Mexico and had already been all through Mexico. Um, he departed Mexico in 1540, traveling through Arizona and New Mexico looking for Cibola, which was the fabled seven cities of gold. In the Arizona and New Mexico areas, he was fairly ruthless. He was frustrated because he hadn't found these seven cities of gold, and he was pretty awful to the natives down there. He slaughtered many of them. He enslaved some. He demanded that his troops and his personnel be hosted with food and even women. So there was one Native American who the Spaniards called the Turk because they said he looked like a Turkish person, and he told them that he knew where Cibola was. He knew where all the gold was, and he could lead them there. So they followed him east through Texas, continuing into Oklahoma in 1541, and then kind of over in eastern Oklahoma and into Arkansas, where he obviously did not find the seven cities of gold, because he made the whole thing up. He lied to them, and he told them that he lied to them just to get them away from the tribes in the New Mexico area. And so one of Coronado's officers, or actually we're not entirely sure which one did it, but one of them killed the Turk, and then Coronado abandoned his search and went back to Mexico. But with Coronado was Friar Juan de Padilla, and Padilla was impressed with the Indians, and he wanted to return to convert them to Christianity. So he did, with De Campo and then a couple of others, and he traveled through western Oklahoma, and he actually went back to the area that he was at, which was a Wichita settlement in Arkansas, and he wanted to convert them. Well, there was some sort of an issue, and Padilla was killed, but he was a very inspirational person, and De Campo and the other two that he were traveling with were very upset about his being killed. And so they traveled back to Mexico, basically down the route that is now I-35, but it took them 5 years to travel back because they, in honor of Padilla, carried a cross all that way. Spain, because of this exploration, Spain was able to claim dominion over the western side of the Mississippi Valley, which means that the whole western United States was under Spain's control. They claimed it. They also brought horses to American Indians, which is a very significant development. And the next group of explorers were the French explorers. And the French were more interested in furs, and they actually treated the Native Americans differently. They didn't subjugate them, they didn't treat them as lesser people, and they treated them a little bit more equal. La Salle canoed down the Mississippi River and then claimed the western lands for France. And I can't really explain how one group can claim it and another group can claim it, but that's just kind of how a lot of, not just in America, but colonization worked. You can claim it, but if you haven't done anything with it, then someone else can come in and claim it again. And then you have to fight them for that claim. So there were other French explorers, and it was kind of an interesting movement for France, because once they got the western lands, which included Oklahoma, they moved on to it, and they were interested in fur and trading. And so they developed like pretty interesting and sometimes very big fur trades. They would trade beaver, buffalo, different kinds of fur, which they would ship back to Europe. And in return, they would give guns and such to the American Indians. So France controlled Oklahoma for about 150 years, and it kind of traded back and forth. Like the Treaty of Paris flipped it back to Spain, and then the Treaty of Ildefonso flipped us back to French control. But In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase gave what is modern-day Oklahoma to the United States, and Thomas Jefferson engineered that purchase from Napoleon Bonaparte, who was hard up for cash for other warring endeavors. As you can see here, we're borrowing this Prezi about American explorers into Oklahoma by Zeta Smith. First, there was a Sparks expedition led by Captain Richard Sparks and ordered by President Jefferson. I think Jefferson wanted to find out what he had purchased with the Louisiana Purchase. Next is the Pike-Wilkinson expedition. Zebulon Pike is who Pikes Peak in Colorado is named after. And we have the Sibley expedition by George C. Sibley. He's looking for salt, and he found it in the Great Salt Plains. The Long Bell expedition by Stephen Long, John Bell, brought back a lot of plant information. The Nuttall expedition by Thomas Nuttall provided the most useful and complete information of Oklahoma. He spent many months in the region, collected plant samples. And those are the U.S. American explorers into our region. The Native Americans and the European Americans had fairly different cultures that resulted in some clashes and not a huge amount of harmony. You can see here from this Venn diagram where we're comparing Native Americans and European Americans, they both farmed. That's an often overlooked point. A lot of times people believe that European Americans farmed and Native Americans just foraged and hunted, but Native Americans were actually farmers. That point is important because one of the European American claims to taking the Native American lands was because they said that the Native Americans were not properly using the lands. In particular, they were not farming, but in actuality, they were. European Americans cleared the forest and hunted for commercial trade as well as personal use. But the Native Americans primarily hunted the forest for food and clothes prior to European contact. Once the Europeans came and contacted the Native Americans and the Native Americans realized they could sell what they hunted, they did begin to hunt commercially. European Americans were monotheistic, which means that they believed in one god, while Native Americans were polytheistic, which means that they believed in multiple gods. The land was a big point of contention between Native and European Americans. The Native Americans believed that the land was to be shared by all and could not be owned by one, and European Americans believed in deeded land ownership. Let's talk a little bit more about land ownership. For Europeans, land was personal property and was to be used to benefit its owner. And it was related to class and social structure. The more land you had, the higher your social class was. That thinking was brought from Europe to and continued in America by European Americans. They fenced land for farming and ranching. Meanwhile, Native Americans did not believe that land could be owned. It was to be shared by all and not used to elevate social standing. Many tribes were semi-nomadic and used gifts that the lands provided. So when those gifts, which were like deer and if they were foraging certain types of plants, whenever those gifts were out of balance ecologically, the tribes would move elsewhere. So the European Indian trade brought changes to the Native American culture. Weapons, the Europeans traded guns, ammunition, knives, and hatchets and axes to the American Indians in exchange for hides and furs. Buffalo, deer, beaver, otter, mink, muskrat, that's what the Europeans wanted to take from the Native Americans. And other goods, the Europeans also traded hose, cloth, blankets, mirrors, and Native Americans would trade horses, which were often stolen from other tribes, and captives, also stolen from other tribes, to Europeans. So we've finished the lecture learning presentation part of this makeup class, and now let's talk about the assignment. So you'll do one assignment each week. So you can choose an assignment. These are some examples of assignments. There are additional examples of assignments on the syllabus that you've been sent the link for. Any of these assignments can go away if you will leave your home and go visit a place. This is a place-based education focus class. I want to motivate you to walk outside. You're in Oklahoma. You can learn about Oklahoma by visiting someplace in Oklahoma. There are in addition to the Spiro Mounds, there are other suggestions, recommendations for visits on the syllabus. If you can't make it to any one of those recommendations, then propose something to me. Again, you're in Oklahoma, and you're a high school student. You can think of something that's interesting, that fits within what you just learned about. So there's geologic regions, there's ancient tribe region. I mean, just flip back through this video and think about the things you learned and propose something different if you can't make it to one of the already recommended places. Now, one of the already recommended places is approved, so you can do that. So your assignments are due prior to the next week's class. This assignment would be due prior to 2:30 Wednesday, December 19th. And as always, reach out to me if you have questions. Have a great week.